right, what is up, folks? This is your boy, RC Apologist, here with Theological Discussion, and I am your host, RC Apologist. And with us, of course, is the usual co-host. He is the Orange. He is the Candy Corn Doggo. He is Aeve Nova. Aeve, welcome to the show. Coming back on us again as co-host.
Well, hello, everyone. Oh, it is absolutely great to see everyone again.
Likewise.
Even though I can't technically see you,
Well, I mean,
glad that everyone is.
It's a thought that counts. It's a thought that counts. So, I mean, it's always something to consider. But, hey.
Of course it is, yes.
But there is some.
I'm very much looking forward to an amazing show tonight.
Which brings me to what we're talking about, because, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us a special guest with us. He is a very special guest. And I just want to go over a bit what he is known for. Folks, we have indeed someone who has written a book, and it is a very interesting book. I'm going to put it on the screen for the audience to see. It is known as Barack Obama versus the Black Hebrew Israelites. What a title! But what's the subtitle? The subtitle, Introduction to the History and Beliefs of One West Hebrew Israelism. Say, what? All right. And folks, we have got the guest with us. He is Vocab Malone. No, not Post Malone. We didn't get none of that wrong in terms of the name. Get out of the culture there. We're talking about the real Malone, not the Post. The present Malone, not the Post. So, ladies and gentlemen, with us in the Zoom studio, if you will, ladies and gentlemen, it is none other than Vocab Malone. Vocab, thank you for coming on to the show.
You are welcome.
Oh man, see, this is the other thing too. He is going to basically overpower me at this point because of the fact that he's got special effects on his thing, and I don't, because I'm that much of a broke chum at this point.
I almost thought it was just me that heard that echo, but I guess it was everyone.
Oh yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Hey,
Vocab,
hey,
what's up?
When you're an apologist, got to be on that high quality level of professionalism. Anyways, yeah, what's up, man?
Not much. Good to be with you, RC and Aeve. Man, I think it was probably a year ago you first hit me up, and now it's finally happening.
Oh yeah, we've been trying to work on this for a while. I remember like a while back when the NonSequitur Show was still a thing, that they were considering having a discussion on the topic of the one Black Hebrew Israelites, and I don't even think with who they tried to get arranged for that even happened. I guess they just never was able to find anybody who was willing to discuss that matter from the Black Hebrew Israelite side. But speaking of that, let's get into that. We want to know the question about what. Well, first, before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
Well, I'm a part-time apologist. I got a regular job, as it were, and then I do a lot of apologetic stuff. I'm into other stuff, some geek culture stuff, a little bit of baseball, some other things like that. But really, being a Christian is my primary identity, and so apologetics and evangelism is the lane that I ended up falling into by the Lord's grace, and I kind of try to do the topics that are very localized and just hit me where I'm at, regardless of what they are at the time. So when I first started really doing a lot of public stuff, a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormonism, and also, of course, the neo-atheists at that time, a little bit of Roman Catholicism here and there, transitioned into Islam, transitioned into Hebrew Israelism, and those are really the two main things these days that I focus on. So somewhat of a specialist, doesn't mean I am not a student still, but just the main area is Hebrew Israelism and then Islam to an extent. And then sort of not topically, but more methodologically, I seek to try to figure out ways, along with others, there's a bunch of people trying to do this, how to present apologetics online, social media, and different unique and creative ways. And so some consideration goes into the packaging and things like that as well. trying to figure out how to do things in the 21st century, basically. So that's really what's up, man.
So that's what's up, indeed, man. So let's go over then one of those specialties of the topics, and that is one that, if I'm not mistaken, like whenever you like came out with the encounter that you had, which you recorded on an iPod, what year was that again? That this incident occurred?
Gosh, I have to go back and look. It's I think it was about 10 years ago. I think if I'm not mistaken. I think that's about right. Yeah.
Because I remember you said you were buying an Incredible Hulk action figure for your kid when this happened, and if they were still there on the way back, you would eventually decide to encounter them. And so when you posted that, people thought that you were like an expert on this kind of stuff, and I guess it was because you seemed to handle yourself well, and at the same time, it's like no one really encountered anything like this before.
Right. So I knew some issues in relationship to apologetics and theology. So, when you encounter something new, if you have somewhat of a background in that, you can move on your feet to a certain extent, even if what you're hearing is a new twist on it or whatever. And you had some experience with dealing with alternative religions and cults, as I outlined before. And so there was that. And then I had encountered, Mormons are generally speaking, now I've run into some aggressive ones in my day, but generally speaking, nice, kind, friendly. You want them as neighbors. Jehovah's Witnesses, generally speaking, middle class, hardworking, family members, regular people in a lot of ways. Hebrew Israelites approach things differently. As far as the guys out on the street, okay, there's different types of Hebrew Israelites. Not all of them do the street teaching, as they call it, and not all of them do things in that way, and they have different views and whatnot. But my things started out there in the street. But my point is, by saying that, when I dealt with them, even though it was kind of like, whoa, these guys are coming out the gate, because I had some background in things like hip-hop battles. I'm not claiming I was winning titles or anything, but I had this background and being at open mics and battles where, it was very aggressive, and you're crammed in a room with a bunch of people, and they'll boo you off stage if they don't like you, and they'll try to take the mic from you in the middle of a verse, and just kind of this kind of testing environment. And you have to have a certain level of poise to kind of, get around there. And again, even similar to certain kind of street sports situations, specifically basketball, again, I was never the greatest, but, being in these kind of situations in city parks and stuff, there's a certain level where you kind of learn some things about how to handle yourself. And so I think the other part of it, RC, was that people had not maybe seen or heard, actually, somebody kind of go toe-to-toe and kind of be able to come back at them the way they approach things. I don't mean yelling back and acting crazy, but being able to say, okay, we're going to be assertive today. Okay, let's be assertive together then. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so it kind of just worked out. And next thing I knew, boom, people were asking me questions, and here I am a couple of years later. It's wild.
That is a very good point. And actually, I wanted to ask you a question about, like what is your perspective of when people say that, Black Hebrew Israelites are, I guess, for better or worse, a cult, thereabouts. People, they have a pretty negative opinion about this. But so what would be your response to those people that would say that it's a bad thing?
Well, a few things. If I understand what you're asking, Aeve, number one, whether something is true or false, and I'm sure you guys know this, doing the stuff you do, but I'm just talking to the audience. Whether something is true or false is irrelevant to sort of any label you may give it. So something could be a cult, of course, or called a cult by whoever at the time, and of course still be true. And
I'm sorry if I made it sound like a weird type of question. I didn't mean it to sound like that, but
no, I'm not criticizing you. I'm telling everybody else so they understand. Christianity was called a cult by the Romans, for example, in the beginning of its existence, and even today. Actually, I learned this when I went to France to do some ministry to the Muslims, mainly from North Africa, who had migrated to France. I learned that evangelicalism was considered by a lot of government officials, and that mattered because Europe, there's a lot more red tape, especially in France. And so evangelicals are actually considered a cult, even today, by a lot of folks in certain contexts, right? It's like, well, they're not Roman Catholics. What are these folks? It's a sort of this weird cult. So that's one thing to consider. Now, in academic circles, they like to try to, avoid value judgments and whatnot. And so they've moved away, by and large, from the word cult. They prefer the kind of general nondescript term now, NRMs, which is new religious movements. And so the new kind of lingo in academia and your relationship to these movements is NRMs, new religious movements. Now, whatever Hebrew Israelism is or isn't, it certainly is an ideology. And that's why sometimes people will say the Hebrew Israelites, and I'll say that too, don't get me wrong. But I love to make people understand it's an ideology, because anybody can embrace the ideology regardless of their culture or background or skin tone, really. And so Hebrew Israelism, it helps people see this is an ideology. Now, to the last part of your question, is it bad? Hypothetically, there could be a version of Hebrew Israelism which was sort of just off and not really bad in its implications. But I found very few people that hold to this hypothetical construct, meaning someone could be essentially mistaken or perhaps right that they are an Israelite in some way, blood relation, right? A descendant from the ancient Hebrews. If that's all it was, it'd be really a matter of history. But the Hebrew Israelites and the ideology of Hebrew Israelism does not stop there. It begins to erode the Trinity. It begins to erode the foundations of the New Testament. It erodes the full deity of Christ. It erodes the full gospel, and you get back to the Judaizing heresy that we find in Galatians time and time again. And then sometimes it gets into ethnocentric bigotry and racism outright. Not all versions, but a lot of versions. So the problem is it's sort of like this strange magnet that by itself would not be bad, but it tends to attract all these other things that are bad. And that's because they do follow to a certain extent. And one reason is this, and I'll end on this, because a key part of most versions of Hebrew Israelism is that not only is this our ethnic identity, the true Jews, it matters theologically in the sight of God. If they didn't have that second component, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But almost all versions, whether it's hard or soft, have that component. And that is simply not true in light of the New Testament revelation. And indeed, I really say in light of the whole Old and New Testaments. But in the New Testament, the mystery is sort of unveiled and things are even more clear, biblically speaking, about who God's people really are.
Well, in light of the New Testament revelation, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. But I do tend to, and I think you kind of agree with this as well, that the Black Hebrew Israelites, they do tend to focus on race, where they believe that, like the first humans from Ethiopia, like God's chosen people, and that's kind of like how they developed this ideology. It does have a lot to do with race, unfortunately. Now, you can agree with, being that, but like, as far as I'm concerned, like, I've really seen, like, most people that do adhere to that, they do tend to be kind of adhered to a certain type of a race, And
being focused on
it might be.
Well, so the more you get into Hebrew Israelism, the more diverse you see it is. Mm-hmm. And so my perspective is, kind of diverse from kind of going into the trenches. Like, I'm debating a guy this Saturday, and the debate is on reincarnation. Not all Hebrew Israelites hold to reincarnation. If I had to guess, I might say 25%. But ironically, according to a 2009 Pew survey, 24% of Christians, self-professed, also believe in reincarnation. Yeah. Now, the Hebrew Israelites who believe in it believe it's a biblical precept, a biblical concept, right? So by saying that, the guy I'm debating, right, he's a Hispanic guy. He's a Hispanic guy. He used to roll with IUIC. So, there's all kinds of guys and gals involved with this. And that's one thing. Now, here's the thing, though. Some of the issues that certain Hebrew Israelites raise are legitimate issues. So this gets into different issues. People can agree or disagree with me. that's on them. Okay. But
Yeah.
I just think it's as far as this issues of police brutality, I think are important to ask what do we do about this? What do we say about this? And the list goes on, the sort of the history of America, the defense from Southern pastors and leaders and Christians of antebellum slavery, and the silence of a lot of the Protestant church during the civil rights era. Now, we're not talking about everybody, but when we look, we see a lot of troubling trends. And so we ask, what do we do about these? And so the Hebrew Israelites will raise these issues, but they almost always, to be honest with you, give the wrong answer about these relevant topics and issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do got one question for myself here. And by the way, just letting you know, because then the audience know as well, that for some reason on the YouTube live chat, our thing is saying we have 16:42 till like an hour is like a limit or something like that, but I haven't seen that happen with any other YouTubers so far, so I don't know what that's all about. We'll see if we get cut off or not, but if that does happen, we'll just record the rest of this so that way everyone else can at least listen to that part later on, and we'll have to just divide it into two parts. But the question I want to ask is, because I've noticed in your book that you list off a list of One West Israelites of the camps, and then you list the non-One Westers, and then you list out the Chicago groups, which is of Israel, of God, and then I forget what the other one is. Ever since you published this book, have there been any new camps that have formed since then, after that?
Oh yeah, an insane amount. Hey, before I answer that question,
sure.
I've got this set up with my light and all this, assuming that we are going to be on video. Is it just going to be the picture showing the whole time? There will be no video element?
Yeah, it's just going to be the picture thing. We've tried to figure out if there would be a way to produce the quality and everything through OBS through the video, but unfortunately I have not been able to find a way to do so yet. I'm probably going to have to talk with James from Modern Day Debate about that, but yeah, so far it's just going to be the picture until we can like get an actual thing, because it would have been amazing for people to see like the actual like nice beard that you have growing on you right now, because like I said, that was another thing that was interesting, is that you got like back then you were clean shaven and now you got like this like almost like a tulip beard.
I was just about to say, I really do appreciate your spiffy fedora.
Well, I was saying beard, but okay, fedora too. Point is, he's.
Well, this hat's a Kangol, but thank you for the compliment on the beard. And fedora is more what we wear when we want to give homage to old school Italians. But yes, I rock the fedoras as well, just not the day. Yeah, no doubt. So that's all good. It is what it is. All right. So
sorry about that, man.
Since this little list that I made. If I made this list now, first of all, it's not like I was getting literally every person. I just got the folks that I was aware of at the time and stuff like that. This list, if I use the same font and chart like table and all that, this thing could be at least 6 pages, easy 6 pages. And the thing is, for a while I was kind of keeping a little spreadsheet, but I'm not very good at little spreadsheets, and they kind of irritate me with the little tables and stuff. So I kind of gave up on that. Every now and then I write down a new camp's name. When I publish some new material, I might kind of put out an updated list. I don't know. It's so much, kind of becomes mind-numbing and overwhelming to keep track of every little one of these guys, and stuff like that. But we'll see. But there's a grip more. It's insane. Every week I find a new camp. I just found a camp that embraces the Book of Mormon and says that Nephi was a black Hebrew and they need to wake up to the Book of Mormon because it's their people's book. So you're going to find more stuff like this. People are like, well, that's weird. Wow. People don't understand. As Hebrew Israelism grows, it's going to become more diversified like that. Like I could make several predictions, and I bet we'll see a lot of them kind of come true just based upon what I think are trends within this movement. So, it's wild.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they don't keep growing too much. Hopefully at some point we see a decrease of it.
Eventually, because every cult or new religious movement has its sort of statute of limitations. Generally speaking, there's an ebb and then there's a flow. There's a rise and fall. Generally speaking, Christian Science used to be booming. Mark Twain wrote on it, thought it was going to overtake Christianity. Now, because of the death of Mary Baker Eddy, which was a long time ago, but because of the rules she instituted, the religion is stagnated. They own the Christian Science Monitor, but they're kind of nothing. They got some people in Boston. If you pick up an old book, I was reading from an old book from the 30s. I like to read old apologetic books sometimes. On my show, I did a show on British Israelism, right? Yeah. And what happened is, in that, it's called The Chaos of the Cults. And it's interesting that a lot of the groups that Van Balen was dealing with, right? I'm not sure that's how you pronounce his name. A lot of those groups are not very relevant in the 21st century now, but those are the groups he was dealing with. And it just shows you there's an ebb and a flow. What about Hebrew Israelism itself? The versions we're seeing now, what will happen with those? Again, can't make predictions. Islam was sort of a Christian cult in a lot of ways, a ripoff of Christianity in the biblical text, and it didn't go away. Will Hebrew Israelism? We just don't know, Right. So in the meantime, Paul says to the Athenians in Acts 17 that, hey, God has sovereignly chosen the time and the place and the culture, the borders, where you are, when you are, right? Mm-hmm. And I heard one guy say, praise God that I wasn't born, in the early 70s, because I played basketball, and thank God I didn't have to wear those tiny little basketball shorts they wore back then, you know what I mean? Or their cheeks hanging out, you know what I'm saying? And I agree, and I'm glad I was in this era instead. Well, with that being said, we are right now, right? And so we deal with it as it comes, kind of. And so the future with Hebrew Israelism, I think as long as I'm alive, it's going to be a thing. If I had to make a prediction, I would say that.
All right, fair point. All right, so we got a question from the Black Doctor in the live chat. He's saying, Vocab, do you think there is any correlation or similarity between the Black Hebrew Israelite and the, quote, woke church? Especially its emphasis on race?
It depends how a person is defining the woke church. So again, the questioner, I don't know what they're kind of pumping into their definition. Mm-hmm. There's certain definitions and understanding of woke church that I personally don't have a problem with and I think are good. There's right. Other versions that people put in there that I don't agree with, and I'd say that's a bad thing. So I can say this because that gets into your assumptions about those issues. I can say this instead. The issues being addressed are similar. And the problem is, my critique would be that a lot of mainstream evangelicalism has not done a very good job in addressing these issues. And so you have these bad answers because, as they say, nature abhors a vacuum, and that usually has to do with power structures. But I think there's some element to the core, sort of in the silence, the Hebrew Israelite megaphone echoes loudly throughout our city streets. Mm-hmm. And again, Christians who don't agree with these issues, well, we shouldn't. You can act like you live in a different era, and you can act like, well, I don't see the importance and all that stuff. But the reality is that kind of those of us in the trenches realize it is important. In fact, from a different event, but in the same location, the picture you guys have me on the screen, I did one time a presentation on say adios to white Jesus. And I thought that was important to deal with because that's a big apologetic issue. Yeah. And so, here we are facing these things. And I, generally speaking, try to separate too hard of some of the political issues that pop up here and there, but it's difficult to completely avoid at the same time. So it depends what the person means by that. But last thing I'll say in this, when you talk about woke church, Pastor Eric Mason wrote a book by that title. And one of my biggest helps and encouragements and inspirations, and no man agrees with every man on everything, right? Unless you're just a yes man. And I'm not a yes man unless it's Jesus. Agrees with everything, right? But has been Pastor Eric Mason. He's a person who really ultimately inspired this book to happen. It would not have happened without his encouragement, inspiration, and support. That's a fact. Mm-hmm. And as far as one of the earliest people who kind of, in a manner of speaking, kind of believed in me and said, hey, talk about this, do this, it was definitely Pastor Eric Mason. And so some people were like, well, and so if you're going to talk about woke church Hebrew Israelism, well, one of the main people who said, hey, we need to get out here and get on top of this thing has been Pastor Eric Mason. He wrote the book Woke Church. So the question is, what do we do with that information? And I do my best to try to not fight with other Christians if I can, because I'd rather fight theologically with Hebrew Israelites than other Christians. And so sometimes I just keep my mouth shut. You know what I mean? Because my goal is not to go around picking fights. I'm not telling everyone else to keep their mouth shut what to do. I'm just saying for me, I'm like, okay, I don't agree with everything. Let me keep it rolling. So.
Gotcha. Which
I totally get it, but like, don't you think it might be a little bit divisive? Like, okay, so if a Christian congregation were to start, why would it be, in regards to a particular type of regional aspect or a particular type of race or something? Why can't we all just believe in Jesus?
Well,
that's already happened.
Yeah.
So things don't get fixed overnight. Things don't get fixed overnight. Here, let me give you a very real example to answer your question, because I think history matters on these points.
It does, yes.
There was a group of Black Methodists who were worshiping with some white Methodists, and they worshiped together, even though over time the white members of the congregation basically took their cues from the culture and did things like move the Black folks to the balcony and the unfinished sections of the church that were still being worked on, that were under construction, assigned them certain places to sit. The Black Christians were still part of the congregation and basically willing to put up with injustice because they were fellowshipping, right? Then you had a situation where they're sort of at the altar, and there's prayer happening, and some of the Black congregants, they're praying and they're in the middle of praying, and it's a kind of a tense emotional time, and the white deacons come over and like, hey, you're praying in the wrong place. Black people aren't allowed to pray here. And it's kind of like, what? And they essentially kind of drag them up and tell them, you can go pray over there. They're willing to interrupt this. They don't care. And so what happens is the AME Zion Church begins out of that. Richard Allen with another of other men said no more, begin their own church, not because they tried to, because this is how they were treated. And what else do you do? And so people are like, why is there a Black church? Well, because this happened. And that's not the only example. It's literally example after example after example. So overnight, this doesn't just automatically sort of change. And I think we got to realize that as we go forward and say, okay, what do we do? Not only that, but, every church is not going to be the exact same. It matters where the church is located. The sort of makeup of the leadership matters. And so even though we need to make sure the church is for all people at all places, all times, and match Revelation 5 and 7, the fact of the matter is, I do think we understand there's churches that sort of have missions based upon what loving their neighbors looks like best in the context they're in. Mm-hmm. And so I think those are the things I take into consideration when I understand what's happening and what's not happening. But the woke church ideas are kind of different than that to an extent, because if you look like when you talk about Pastor Eric Mason, the people that he has around him and that he involves himself with, it's a broad coalition of people. You know what I'm saying? It's not kind of just like, oh, we only accept these kind of people. I mean, I'm a primary example of that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He doesn't have to. Of course. He doesn't have to invite me to. That's a very good example
of like regionality. Absolutely. I never really considered it that way. Interesting.
All right, so I do have one thing I want to ask, and because you did mention the whole thing there with the movement of woke church and everything, and I think this is actually interesting in light of some of the recent controversies with, for example, there was I believe it was in New Jersey, there was a synagogue shooting by one of the members of the of these Hebrew Israelite camps, House of Israel, if I'm not mistaken.
You are mistaken.
Hey, see, even I'm fallible. Do you remember which camp it was? Because I think you mentioned.
Yeah, House of Israel. Maybe this is where it was in your mind at. To be fair to you, House of Israel is the group that confronted the Covington high school students out there at the National Mall or whatever in D.C. During the Right to Life / the Indigenous Peoples March that was happening simultaneously.
Weren't they Native Americans?
No, the Native Americans were there present because there was an Indigenous Peoples March, but the Right to Life folks, because that's always when Right to Life stuff happens, is that time in January, were also there in D.C. So there was two groups there, and the Hebrew Israelites came out not for the Right to Life stuff. I don't think they were aware of that. They came out to harass the Native Americans to tell them, "Don't you know that you're an Israelite? You're on this chart," to tell them all that stuff because
no, I would not. I would not agree with that.
Well, my point is that was House of Israel. That was House of Israel that did that, and that made the news. That was all over the news. The group you're talking about, that David Anderson, the shooter, and it wasn't a synagogue. He wanted to go into a Jewish day school, but it didn't work out. He went to a Jewish deli, a kosher deli, and shot up there and targeted them with Francine Graham, his girlfriend, that he had twisted her mind as well. He was at one time affiliated in some way. The associations are not 100% clear because of the murky nature of some of the statements by law enforcement officials and whatnot. But the group was called the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ. Now, the ICGJC, through a lawyer statement, denied knowledge of him. But so there's contradictions there between what law enforcement were saying. Their offices were raided shortly after this. So it seems like there was good evidence. There was a ICGJC spot in Jersey City there. And it looks like, though, after a while, David Anderson broke away and kind of became disillusioned with the camp structure. And so at the time he did this, he was not part of the ICGJC. Because in 2020, you're not going to find yet any Hebrew Israelite groups who want to take credit for this kind of activity. Whereas, when something crazy happens in regards to jihadi terrorism, ISIS jumps at wanting to take credit for Al-Qaeda. It's almost like they want to, which one of them will get credit for the terrorist act, right? The Hebrew Israelite groups, even the one Western varieties, the militant ones, they want to condemn this. And really, when it comes to the one Westers, it's all a matter of timing for them. They actually believe stuff like this is supposed to happen and going to happen in the future. Say, for example, what David Anderson did specifically. They just think the timing is not right. So it's not dealing with objective morality. It's simply dealing with chronology. And I've got some interviews on my channel with Hebrew Israelite members themselves, past and also one coming up here in June, that will demonstrate this issue even further.
So, yeah, be sure, folks, to follow him on his YouTube channel, Vocab Malone, and stay tuned for that particular interview. But the reason why I asked this is, we have the whole incident that happened with George Floyd. I'm pretty sure you would agree with me that what happened there was an inhumane injustice that had happened to him. But the thing that I'm also noticing that could potentially happen, because I've seen with other incidents that have happened in the past, that some of these groups like IUIC or ISUPK would try to use some of these as sort of a boost to try to get people to come to their side or anything like that, or to make some kind of claim of a general prophecy or something. Because I remember there was a clip you played where IUIC was doing one of their street camps or teachings or whatnot that they've set up, and a shooting had happened, and they're trying to tell people, come over to here or come over to here, and then that was kind of a bit of their way of trying to get people to fall in line and be with them at that point. Is there a chance that we should see this kind of pattern or behavior from any of the camps in the future due to the George Floyd incident? Because while we would certainly think what happened was immoral and everything like that, do you think this is their ammo to then say this is evidence of Esau or Edom being involved or anything like that? Do you think this is something they're going to use to try to boost their numbers?
I once heard a camp guy, Hebrew Israelite, say that every time a police shooting happens, our numbers go up. And the vibe was almost like he was kind of basically saying, keep on killing us Israelites, Esau, because it's only going to increase our numbers. And it is a very real thing that as people attempt to do a theodicy, why were we enslaved? Why did God allow that to happen? Or why are we being shot dead in the streets? They ask these questions. As they attempt to do a theodicy, they stumble upon Hebrew Israelite resources and answers a lot of times. So there's no question the camps grow from this. And that's why I get a little bit frustrated, because I'm dealing with a lot of Hebrew Israelites who, just because I oppose their doctrine, one of their first cards they pull out the deck is, well, Vocab's a bigot and everybody knows it. I don't really spend much time defending myself against those accusations, because I understand that's just the first card they play. So I don't really worry about it, because that's just what they do. I don't really care what these hard edge folks think of me. You know what I mean? And so If somebody wants to defend me, okay. If they don't, then whatever, right? I'm gonna keep it going. And so there's that. But the fact is that they do utilize this stuff, and I become frustrated because on one hand, the Hebrewites are over here. We're like, oh, Vocab's a bigot, he's prejudiced. We all know it. I'm dealing with them. If I post anything critical of police action on social media, and I'm not like some activist guy out here, I'll just post something I feel is relatively minor. Mm-hmm. I get a bunch of folks that I don't know all their affiliations or where they come from. They sort of, with some of what they say, really gives the Hebrewites ammunition. And I just wish some of them could see it, but I'll give you an example. Guys, regardless of what you think of, each case or whatnot, mm-hmm. I don't understand. I'm just talking to anyone hearing this. When people will say, oh, well, look, here's this person shot dead. Why are we talking about that and not talking about the violence in the south side of Chicago? Let me stop there for a second. Sometimes you'll have these things in different states. So Minnesota is not Illinois. So it seems like an extreme category error. Another category error that's getting made here is the police are government officials paid by taxpayers whose motto is to protect and serve. A member who's part of the folk nation, a gang in Chicago, or part of the Crip affiliated sections of a gang in Chicago, they're not paid by taxpayers to protect and serve, right? They're gang members. Their job is to increase their gang's territory and protect their people, supposedly, or something like that. I don't understand why people are comparing the behavior of a cop who's trained in these matters and saying, hey, we can't talk about these cops until we talk about whatever's happening in Chirac. I do not understand that. And to me, when I see that, I'm like, a lot of times gives ammunition to the Israelites who say, see, look at the inaction of the Christian church and look at the kind of callous, uncaring nature. And so it's very frustrating to me because I'm not regularly going out and with marches and I don't think every case is the same. And a lot of times I don't even ascribe motives. I just say, look at the facts, look at the video or whatever. You know what I mean? And it's very difficult because you feel like you're waging a battle on multiple fronts, sometimes dealing with these issues. But it is what it is.
Yep. So we got one person in the chat. I don't know if you would be familiar with these people, but we have Zachary Collier, who has mentioned, quote, I know there is one in Indianapolis whose colors, last I saw them, were black and red. I first saw them at Indy's Comic-Con, their leader anyway. The second encounter with them 2 more years later next to Christ Church Cathedral downtown. I'm not sure, like I said you've seen and heard about a lot of them. They would pop up and almost hard to keep track of them. But by chance, do you happen to possibly know who could possibly go by this in the Indianapolis area, especially if the colors that he notices on them with their outfits is black and red? Because I know ISUPK is black, but with black and red as a combination, is there a pattern that fits in with that?
Let's take a look here. Okay, I'm looking. ISUPK Indianapolis. I see them at the Indiana Black Expo in 2017. There's 2 guys who are in the more traditional black and white. That is the preferred colors of UPK, although they like to put camo in there. The kind of leader guy, he really does, and I'm not trying to be funny, he really does look like Show Nuff. If you that is, and I'm watching this, it's ISUPK crushes Black Heckler at Indiana Black Expo. The guy does have black and red, so they could be referring to ISUPK based upon this. Don't know. I'm going to another page, though. This is 2016, and this says first encounter with the Hebrew Israelites. A couple guys that kind of have black and red, very homemade-looking clothing. Maybe he's talking about those guys. This looks like a local Indianapolis camp that I can tell by their outfits. They're very DIY, do it yourself, but I can also tell they're One West because they are holding up the chart. There's only a few of them, though. So I don't know who this camp is. And they do have black and red on. So I would just have to see a video to see for sure. Sometimes you have Zachary that will rock red and black, but they allow more individuality among their members. So you may see some Sicarian red and black, but you'll see other. They like to try to be the clamp camp with the flare. That's the only ones I see off the top of my head right now. So I'd have to see. I can tell you the ICGJC previously mentioned there. The ICGJC, they wear red and white. So I don't know if the shades of black maybe the person saw and they're maybe thinking red and white. That's a possibility as well. But that's all I see looking at this off the top of my head.
All right. So I want to, speaking of the 12 tribes chart that you mentioned there, because that's actually an interesting thing, because I honestly wanted to figure out what was the evidence for that, because what happened a while back, let me see this was in February 19th, 2019. I called up one of ISUPK's headquarters. I forget which city, but I called them up, and I don't know how good the quality will be for you to hear, but this is essentially how the conversation went down, and it didn't even last 2 minutes with these guys. Here we go.
Hello.
Hey, is this ISUPK?
Yeah.
Alright. I got a question about something I found on your site. It's about the 12 tribes chart.
Uh-huh.
So I'm seeing where it says, the tribe of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and it's pointing out like the West Indians would be Benjamin and the Haitians would be of the tribe of Levi. I'm just curious as to where we know this to be the case, like how we know this information. And you can tell I'm tired in the video.
How? This is the Bible.
Is there a Bible verse that you have in mind, or if you have a Bible on you that can show me where the West Indians are Benjamin, or the North American Indians are from the tribe of Gad, or black people from the tribe of Judah?
You have to come to one of the classes and ask the question.
So, and note, I've called them before and they had no problem answering, but now all of a sudden I've gotten that, and they said that I have to come to one of their classes for me to ask this. So I find that a little odd, and so that's what I want to ask you, is how do they come up with this, or even try to justify it? Because I know you said in the book and elsewhere, Ariah, one of the people I believe is described as one of the original 7 heads of the original movement on One West, came up with the chart. But how do they really try to justify it, other than saying that there was Ariah that came up with the chart?
Well, notice he said it's in the Bible. Now, to be fair, of course, now it is true, the more you know about Hebrew Israelite doctrine, to be frank, the easier it is to kind of confound the average member, to be frank. But to also be fair, how many of our church secretaries, if you called them up and said, hey, could you tell me why you believe in the Trinity? How many of the church secretaries would do a very good job answering it? You know what I'm saying? With that being said, a lot of the members don't even know about the history of Ariah in the chart. They might say the Lord gave this to us or something like that, but they see it as coming out of primarily Genesis chapter 49. Now, this is not ISUPK. This is IUIC. Here I am at Israel, unite.org, 12 tribes of Israel. Now, I'm going to look at this and tell you how they come to Zebulon as being identified as the Mayans, which are located between Guatemala to Panama and scattered regions of the earth, according to this website. Zebulon was a 10th born son of Jacob. His name means my dwelling. They migrated to the Americas. So notice they're saying they came from Israel. In 536 BC during the Persian captivity. Genesis 49:1, and Jacob called unto his son and said, gather yourselves together that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. The last days occur from the days of Christ till today. Read Hebrews 1:2. That statement by itself is actually true. Now here's Genesis 49:13. Listen carefully to this. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be a haven of ships. Quote, that's the Bible verse. Now listen to the commentary. A haven of the sea and a haven for ships is speaking of the Panama Canal. The canal was opened to shipping in 1914. It connects the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans and shortens the amount of time and distance needed to bring valuable cargo to America. Now they're just doing Wikipedia, but this is where they go. In 1965, the U.S. and Panama signed an agreement recognizing Panama's complete sovereignty control over the canal zone. In the year 2000, when America relinquished control over the canal zone to the Panamanians. There's one stipulation, however. If for whatever reason Panama's military could not properly safeguard the canal by said time, the year 2000, America would remain as the canal's sovereign ruler. Under the Bush administration, General Manuel Noriega, who was trained by the CIA, was accused of drug trafficking. America, the Bush administration, then created propaganda in which the American citizens were led to believe Noriega's drug trafficking threatened America's national security shortly after the American government invaded Panama, needlessly destroying and murdering thousands of Panama's citizens and military.
Whoa. Hold on. You're going a little bit too fast.
Well,
I go fast.
He goes fast, man.
I mean, I'm a rapper.
Yeah, and I don't blame him. So.
This is to understand their motivation, not necessarily to deal with everything that they've written here. But the money paragraph is Genesis 49:13 is speaking of the Panama Canal. Now, notice there's no real justification for saying that, but that's part of how they get it. Now, there's other verses here we could look at to help, because I find this fascinating because I kind of love in the sense of it's fascinating to almost see humans whacked out creativity, how they will find ways to put themselves in the Bible where they don't belong. You know, the Branch Davidians did this, the British Israelites did this, and the Hebrewites do it today.
Right. And so ultimately then, because I do remember that's actually one of the passages they go to Genesis 49 for some of this stuff.
That's the main one for the 12 tribes chart.
Yeah.
I'm a new book whenever it comes out, who knows. I have a whole chapter on the 12 tribes chart that will not explain everything because that would take a whole, but it will explain a lot about the 12 tribes chart.
And when you say new book, is this what you kind of hint at in the one, the Barack Obama one? Because you do mention that what you wrote at that time was a abridged version of what you planned was going to be a much bigger work. Is that?
This will probably be a second book proper, but I want to also revisit my first book and make an expanded edition later. But, you know, who really knows what's going to happen? We'll find out. I spend so much time on YouTube, I find it's hard to find time to write, you know?
Right. And that's one thing I actually wanted to kind of bring up to you, is that I know I kind of shared it a bit with you, at least the picture of it, but a while back, I had planned on launching a project of doing an Apologetics quarterly, and I decided along with the team to do a topic on doing and covering the Black Hebrew Israelites, because I remember, as you had mentioned, there's not a lot of resources out on this stuff. And I figured me and my team would try to get on it and write some essays refuting and going over certain points. So hopefully that, you know, along with your book and then this, as you just mentioned here, new ones that's potentially coming out, that more resources can come about, because like what we've got covered is going over Deuteronomy 28, the synagogue of Satan, the explanation of Isaiah 28 verse 10, which I do want to comment on how some of the Hebrew Israelites might use that, because I know IUIC has a thing on that, going over reincarnation, and I even write an article going after Guerrilla Hebrew and the Deacon from Zachary, and exposing them to be the false prophets that they are. So I don't know. Hopefully, I get like an approval from you, or like, you know, a thumbs up or anything whenever that gets released.
Show me your articles. I'd like to see those.
All right, I'll be sure to send some of the rough drafts to you when we get off here. That way, I can put them on a Google Drive and send them your way. But I do want to cover because I know IUIC does like a precept packet that they give to some of their new members, and the way that they go with that is Isaiah 28 verse 10, which says precept must be upon precept. And if anyone's seen them in the street, sometimes they'll usually chant that out. They say precept must be upon precept. And so when I hear that, is IUIC the only one that does that? Is there any other group, or like do all of them do that, and are there some that think that method of interpreting the Bible, they wouldn't think that that's the way how you interpret the Bible? Like, what groups affirm precept upon precept as a method of exegesis?
I have never run into any given Hebrew Israelite who disagrees with the interpretation of precept upon precept from Isaiah 28 and 10. So I've never run into anyone who thinks that's a bad verse to use for how you're supposed to interpret the Bible. Of course, there's all kinds of problems with it. You've got a God waiting thousands of years before he decides to tell the Israelites how they should actually be reading these books. He's like, now, man, you know what? We have these books of Moses. I think it's about time to tell them how to read them now. So here we go, Isaiah 20:10, right?
Yeah.
Of course, the context of Isaiah 20:10 is apparently it's the Israelites actually mocking the prophet of God there. It's not a proof text for interpretation. It's literally backwards. They're saying, stop giving us baby food. They're saying, stop teaching us the law like we're little children. If you look at the context, it's more than mocking. It's not supposed to do that. And, the NIV, for example, captures that. It says, for it is do this, do that, a rule for this, a rule for that, a little here, a little there. But yeah, that they all use that. And what they do is they make a justification to not really take the chronological order of the Bible very seriously, and to not take, to be frank with you, the context of any given scripture very seriously. Now, they would say that's not the case. They would say, no, we're reading the Bible the way it's intended. It's a spiritual book. You read it spiritually, blah, 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 blah. And I say what you guys are doing is playing Hebrew hopscotch. Hopscotch, jump and skip over certain numbers depending on the way the game's directed. I say it's Hebrew hopscotch is what's happening.
Yeah, because I noticed there was a guy named Ricky. I'm sure you're familiar with Jesus the Word is his channel. That he encountered IUIC, and they were kind of doing that kind of thing, and he tried to get them to stop doing that because that's not how you properly interpret it. So. Let me real quick. I just actually want to show people because someone may say, why is vocab saying it's like baby talk? I'm going to actually just show you the Hebrew, because the actual Hebrew is you get the sense even from the actual phonetic sound of it that it's kind of the Israelites mocking what they view as meaningless sounds. And you'll kind of see the sense there in 2010 is, they're mocking what they see as rote repetitions. Here's the way the Hebrew sounds. Sav l'sav, sav l'sav, kav l'kav, kav l'kav. That's what it says, like a baby talk type of thing. Even the way the actual Hebrew sounds poetically and phonetically is them mocking it. Again, sav l'sav, kav l'kav, kav l'kav. Goo goo gaga, mimi mama. You see what I'm saying? And so it's not. That's actually what's happening in 2010. It doesn't have nothing to do with here's the way to interpret the Bible. It's actually mocking instruction from the Bible as being meaningless, rote repetitions. That's what's going on in Isaiah 28. Interesting. And by the way, as you kind of had we're going over that, I put it in on the live chat from the Word software. I put up the Hebrew from, let's see, what's this translation? The Hebrew Interpolated Study Bible. So I don't know if the Hebrew is necessarily accurate on there for me, because I know that I have because I think I have another different Hebrew edition on my deal, but yeah, so there's a bit of a like you mentioned, the baby talk that's mentioned within the Hebrew text of the passage. All right. Interesting.
Well, you can even see to a certain extent, even if you can see, you remember, you guys I'm talking to the audience, you got to go right to left. You can actually see in the highlighted section the similarity of the characters as you go on. You actually see how they're being repeated there. You can actually visually see it.
Yeah. Well, wow, man. So let me try to go over one thing that I'm pretty sure some people have heard about, and you kind of briefly mention it, but I don't know if it's still a thing, because I see some people try to deny it as happening or as being taught. Let's talk about this rape doctrine. All right, so GMS with General Tahar, he has talked about and discussed the issue of what is called the rape doctrine. What exactly would you say is a good way to respond to that? Because some people will say that that's not being taught by us anymore. I mean, does Tahar still affirm this, or does he try to deny it? What if this is the case? Then either way, how do we respond to what it is, and what even is the rape doctrine?
Well, there's only one camp that publicly says they hold to this.
Right.
And it is GMS. And so there's something to remember about that. What they do is they take it from a couple different situations of basically case law in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have I believe Deuteronomy 22 is the place where they take it out of. I believe that's their main proof text, if I'm not mistaken here. Let me see here. And they say, look, in this Old Testament law, what this is saying is that if a Hebrew Israelite man saw an unmarried woman, so she has to be unmarried, he can have her and take her and essentially marry her by raping her. That's what they say this means. Let me see here where it is. All right, here, verse 25. It's verse 28, rather. I think this is the best.
Right.
If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her, so seizes her is the main thing that they focus on there,
right,
and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days.
I actually covered this passage one time on my channel, but that's seriously what they try to use to justify that.
Just GMS again. Every camp,
just GMS.
They say, and they love to distract. They'll say this. Well, who out here is going out and raping people? We don't do that. We don't go out here raping people. What are you talking about? We don't rape anybody. Why name one GMS member who's raped somebody? They'll say something like that, and that's not really we're not talking about that. We're asking about their doctrine of what they say is going to be able to take place in the kingdom.
Right.
So they're talking about a state of affairs that symbolizes God's rule on the earth, and they're talking about this is what the kingdom is going to look like, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what they're talking about in the future. Now, GMS is a little bit different. They say that this can apply to women, quote, of any nation. So they can take, Ishmaelites, Edomites, Ammonites, Moabites. These are all their names for different people groups, right? Hamites, these names they've got for different people groups on the earth, right? And actually take them. Other groups say, no. I asked the leader of One Body in Yahushua, which they left IUIC. I said, are you going to take women of other nations? And he said, we're not going to lay down with your dogs, vocab. We're not going to lay down with your dogs.
Oh my God, that is a good impersonation of it, because I've seen One Body in Yahushua, that particular leader.
Bishop Jephthah or something like that. I forgot what his name is, but yeah. So that's what So not all the camps even agree on that aspect, but GMS would, and that's what they would say. And the other thing that makes it particularly reprehensible is that they interpret the phrase from the KJV, "flower of her youth," as meaning when a woman first has her period. Mm-hmm. And so that matches up with them saying, well, as soon as she has her period, you could do this. And so, sometimes girls as young as, say, 11, have periods. Under GMS understanding in the future, during the kingdom, you would be able to take that 11-year-old girl, rape her, and then marry her.
Right, because I remember that's actually what, whenever I think it was Polite was the guy that was talking with them, Dahar said that, in the kingdom of heaven, we're going to get women as young as 12 years old.
Yeah, however young.
A very common thing in Islam.
Well, I mean, it's funny, though, in Islam, Muhammad got started a little bit earlier than that,
Yeah, he did.
Marrying 6 years old, marrying 6-year-olds, and I'm saying, of course, consummating at 9. And so it's kind of, we have a little skit about that with Epstein coming out, where Epstein talks about, he's like,
going there.
Epstein tells Muhammad in the Boom Boom Room episode, it hasn't dropped yet. He's like, Epstein says, yeah, some of these girls were as young as 12. And Muhammad goes,
6 and 9. What the heck?
No. Epstein saying Epstein says some of his girls were as young as 12, because generally speaking, it seems like Epstein liked 14 to 17, 15, 16, especially based upon what we understand. And he says, some were as young as 12. And then Muhammad says, "Oh, I see. So you like older women."
Yeah, because I remember you play Muhammad in Muhammad's Boom Boom Room as well.
I don't know what you're talking about there.
Oh yeah, right. That's okay. So yeah, remember
I don't know who plays that guy, but whoever does it, man, is a fine comedic actor. I tell you that.
All right, it's just amazing. Got a nice beard. So
I think it's 1 Corinthians. I think 7:36. The funny thing is, though, the flower of her age, almost certainly means that she's past her youth, sort of past her prime. But now there's different debates on that. There's some people who do interpret it as arrive to years of maturity and be ready for marriage. But regardless, they're taking 1 Corinthians 7:36, this different thing, matching it up with this perverse interpretation of Deuteronomy, and you just have a mess there. And that's why some of the camps actually call GMS G-mess.
Bound to see that happening, yeah. So let me ask this. Great. I had it and then it left me. Aeve, do you have a question that you'd like to ask? And by the way, just remind our audience, if y'all have a question to ask Vocab, he's here for the time being. If you got a question, ask it. That's part of the reason we got the program here, so that way we got the man, Vocab Malone, here to answer any questions y'all might have about Black Hebrew Israelites, how to encounter them, what are some things that maybe we need to know. That way, if you do confront them, there you go. Actually, there's a question, it just got to me. So let's say this, because, it is dealing with the urban apologetics in this, as you describe it. So they do try to go for the urban community, try to target minorities is usually where their goals are. But if someone was white, like, I would say some people are that want to encounter these people, will they have any decent chance at trying to evangelize or witness in this area? And if so, what would be some tips that you would be able to recommend as they encounter them, in light of what your experience of your encounters with these groups are?
You're saying if someone is white, they run into a camp on the street and they're trying to have a conversation theologically with them. Is that what you're saying?
Right, in hopes of a chance to witness.
You're not saying like trying to join or anything like that.
Oh no, like I've actually found that interesting when I talked to I think it was IUIC, and they said, "Oh, I have no chance of joining or anything like that." I'm like, "Oh, okay, well I guess that's I don't have no chance at that point." So, but yeah, like if someone just walks around, they see them on the street, and they decide to encounter them, would they have any chance of getting to these people? And witnessing to them, and if so, do you have any tips for them to help advance that cause?
Well, remember, it's about, in their mind, if you're a member of another nation. So let's say you're an Arabic Christian. To them, you're an Ishmaelite and cannot be saved. Let's say you're Japanese. To them, you're an Ammonite and cannot be saved. Now, these are one Westers we're talking about, the guys on the street mainly.
Right.
Let's say you're Chinese. You're a Moabite and cannot be saved, kind of like our friend in the live chat, Nate. He's a Moabite and cannot be saved. Let's say that you're African. You come from, let's go to East Africa because that's particularly heinous to them. You're Kenyan and you're first generation. To them, you're a Hamite and cannot be saved.
Right, like Obama, like you mentioned in your book, right?
Does that have to do with like nationality or race, or like what's the cutoff?
I believe it's nationality, isn't it?
Nationality, That's what it sounds like.
It's who your father is. But remember, the way they view it is that the so-called Hamites sold the Israelites into slavery to the Ishmaelites and the Edomites. That would be the way they would ethnically describe that transatlantic slave trade 400-year period. That's the way they would describe it in ethnic terms.
Okay.
So to them, they're Israelites who dwelt among Hamites. So they're Semitic, whereas the Africans are Hamitic. You see what I'm saying? And so that's the way they would view it. Now, so the basic, no matter what you are, if you disagree with them, they got special words for you. If you're a Black Christian, they like to call you, an Uncle Tom or something. If you're something else, they'll call you something else. Or we just don't have time,
of course.
time to deal with
those kinds
with you,
Right.
that kind of stuff.
So what would I be, by the way, on their thing? My dad, or my family from my dad's side, comes in the German line. So what would they call that?
It's an Edomite, because you're German. They like to especially say, people who are German, they love to especially say that there's a chance they may be fake Jews, who they call Amalekites, so they may be there as well.
Well, then, I'll keep that in mind.
I've never heard that term before, Amalekite, aside from the gemstone, which is like, I think, green and blue or something.
Well, it's also in the First Samuel too.
Yeah, Amalekite.
Yes, it is.
Saul was of course supposed to destroy them. Haman was out of that line, so it's a particularly the idea is it's folks who want to especially come after the Jews, and they believe they've taken their identity.
Would you also use the terms like heathens or infidels?
Yeah, well, they don't. Infidels, that's Islamic. They don't like that. Heathens, yeah, heathen or pagan, yeah, they'll definitely go with that. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And so that's mainly the main thing that would separate in that conversation if someone is trying to witness to them, is that the whole mindset that they have is, what is your nationality, who are you, and if they see you as another nationality, you're saying that they're kind of just going to shut that off. If they're
not there to proselytize you, they're there to condemn you. So where you fall on the chart, according to a One Webster, it determines if they want to proselytize you or damn you.
But is there a chance to witness to some of these people that could actually work?
Oh yeah, of course. And so the thing is, what people have got to do there is they've got to be able to focus on the gospel. Because if you are thin-skinned and particularly susceptible to being distracted and put off topic by questions about politics and ethnic, issues and those kinds of issues, then they're going to get you off and you're going to be talking about something else. And so I think a lot of people, to be honest, who are not really very prudent in how they discuss those issues and their ability to be disciplined and in conversation, I think it is a mistake for them at this point in their development to engage Hebrew Israelites on the street. So it's very contextual. So if you look, as we look at the art and science of missiology, that's the theology of missions. You can have mission fields domestically. You don't have to get in a boat or a plane to be doing mission work in a cross-cultural context. You know what I'm saying? And so here we are in a certain context, and I think it's bad for people to act like they automatically sort of have enough on a handle to just jump in there. Now, I'm not saying don't, but I'm also saying I think it's good to walk humbly as you go into it. You ask questions. You're listening. You're trying to understand what's being said. The idea is we first listen to understand before we listen to critique or criticize. And I think that's a good policy. So my point is, whoever you are, try to find out what's going on. See what's going on, and ask those questions and see what's up, right? And get educated and then deal, because it doesn't make sense for you to meet a Hebrew Israelite at work and be like, hey, well, what's up with this rape doctrine? You don't know if they believe that. It's highly unlikely that given Hebrew Israelite agrees with the idea of GMS of the rape doctrine. So it doesn't make sense. It's like somebody asking you, "Oh, you're a Christian? Hey, why do you guys handle snakes?" You're like, "What?" That's a couple guys, and they would feel the same way. And so it's more about just kind of this level of like, let's have some humility when you go into this. It's a little bit different for me because I generally have some idea of what these individual guys know, and so I, instead of just asking them questions, will bring out things they're not telling the audience they believe, but everyone's not there. You see what I'm saying? And so I understand that, and I think we should all understand that. So I just think there's sort of a level of epistemic humility, no matter how they are. And the other thing is, the Bible talks in Galatians 6 about the fruit of the Spirit, right? And there's this idea of patience and long suffering and temperance and gentleness, self-control. If you realize there's some of those you fall particularly short in, you just need to be wise and just remove yourself, because these guys, we can say, well, they're not very educated, but a lot of them are masters at reading people, and they're masters at psychological warfare. And a lot of people may have a college degree and maybe even be a boss at their job. But you know what? They're not very good at psychological warfare, and they're not very good at reading people like a lot of these Hebrew Israelite guys are. And so do not underestimate their ability to push your buttons and have you act a fool. So I think people really need to take an honest, hard look at themselves, where they're at, walk circumspect, and be sober-minded in their self-analysis. So me saying that, yes, we need. And the thing is, with all that being said, I think the more people that engage them, the better it is. But you need to realize what you're getting into. If you're going to go in there, be like arrogant, cocky, and just and you don't really have a lot of substance, and you don't know what's going on, and you're easily distracted. Next thing you know, you're in there defending your favorite political party instead of really dealing with the issues, or you're upset because they said something bad about the Irish or the Scottish, and you're part Irish. You just need to not jump in yet. You're just simply not ready, because they're gonna destroy you in a different way, because they will be able to get you off track, and you're gonna walk away being like, oh, that
right. Well, I guess that's the whole problem with political ideology and tribalism. Yeah.
So main thing you're suggesting is, before you even go in, make sure you have that virtue of patience.
Yeah.
All right. So
that's a big thing, and just you have a level of discipline and how how to navigate a conversation. To have a certain level of discipline. And so one thing I'll do sometimes is I'll be like, all right, I'm going to go, and I'll tell the cameraman, I'll say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go talk to these guys today, and here's what I want to talk to them about. And I'll say, here's why. And I'll say, they're going to talk about everything else, but I'm going to keep on bringing up this particular issue, and let's go see what happens. And I did that a couple of weeks ago with reincarnation, for example. It's a different issue. I try to put different issues at their feet and see what happens at different times. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, I'll have a certain thing I'm really trying to focus on with them. And, a lot of them like to play Hebrew hopscotch. We don't always get anywhere, and that's just kind of how it is. But you get enough out of the conversation that I think when we put the video up, I think is helpful for other people. And I think that's good. Do your best to kind of focus on a couple key things. And so for most Christians, having that handle on the gospel and who is God, and just focusing on that despite what else is being said, and really going to the Bible, for your answers and your reasons, will really benefit in the long term. And so just kind of, yes, God moves and works. And so, of course, it doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, this can happen. But I want to give a bunch of caveats and warnings first, because to be frank, I'm not saying I do this perfect, because no one does it perfect. I just see a lot of Christians messing up in this area. Yeah. They don't take the Hebrews seriously. They're very sensitive about issues of race. They don't realize a lot of what they're saying, how it sounds. They're not very interested in actually understanding what these guys believe. They just know it's wrong. They don't know the Bible very well themselves. They have thin skin. It's just, and it's just a disaster kind of waiting to happen a lot of times.
Right, exactly. And this might be kind of a petty question, because I believe you already addressed this. But when it comes to the group of Black Hebrew Israelites, like you yourself, you're not black. Let's get real. So why do they call
No one's ever pointed that out before, man. I'm glad. It's like Han told 3PO when he was in the middle of kissing Leia. I'm glad
you're not. I know. It's just
you're Sicilian, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Kind of make it a little bit more divisive, like when they use that kind of language. And they're like, oh well, we're the original God's people from Ethiopia. Like we're the black.
I don't. Real quick, Aeve, the older Hebrew Israelites say Ethiopia. The Ethiopian thing is not generally something the newer guys say. That's sort of an older.
No, and maybe not the newer guys, but I've definitely seen that from that group before. So that's why.
Yeah, some of the older ones do. Generally not campers. They generally have very mixed opinions on Ethiopia. The older Hebrew Israelites in the beginning of the 20th century, Ethiopia was like their hotbed where they pointed to stuff. But they've really moved away from that a lot recently. They'll focus more, say, if they're going to focus on something in Africa, the Igbo peoples, for example, is one of the key peoples they focus on. But my view, it's very contextual, right? And so I grew up in situations where I had to kind of move in these circles. And I believe God can use me by His grace, sort of as a bridge figure. So connecting to people to help them understand these issues better, and then maybe get on some places and platforms that some of the more kind of underground level urban apologists may not always have access to for whatever reason, and kind of be a bridge figure to cross over to things, kind of a bridge builder. Not the only one, but just trying to be helpful in my little role in the mix. But there's lots of people who they have different backgrounds and stuff, and they're involved with this as well. And it's kind of like when you think about, again, cross-cultural missions, people might have pointed out to Hudson Taylor, that he hey, Hudson Taylor, I don't know if you know this, but actually you're not Chinese. Why are you going to China? You know what I'm saying? The point is, he had a heart for the Chinese, and the Lord used him in a mighty way. And he was even sort of culturally submissive to them in many ways, and how he moved with humility. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the same can be said for how do you say his name? Adoram Judson. I always mess up his name. But I think similar thing can be said for him. And so Donoram Judson, I believe, who went to Burma. And so you look at those folks, and if you understand it's sort of a missiological and what's happening there, then you realize there could be a place for some folks. But even modern missiology recognizes the best thing to do is to have, sort of, for lack of a better word, the local folks taking ownership and being in charge. And so I just kind of humbly roll in my little place in this, and then until the Lord wants me to do something else, and I bow out and go somewhere else. Here I am doing what I think should be done to hopefully help a problem.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So now I do have one question, because I mentioned earlier the how to witness to these guys. A while back, I just decided to street preach at a bar, and while I was there, of course, I've dealt with the usual hostility that comes from there. But at one point, me and a friend of mine were, preaching and witnessing to people, and this dude comes up out of nowhere and says, he was approving and liking the message that we were kind of saying, though he kind of came in a little late. But at one point he said, "Man, y'all don't know this, but I'm an Israelite." And so this was shortly after we had seen your videos and had seen a couple of debates and seen the Reformed Apologetics Ministry movie that came out on this subject. So as soon as this happened, we both look at each other like, okay, now we're going to get real here. So we engaged in conversation back and forth with him. And at one point, we engaged on the Apocrypha, which, according to them, they view the Apocrypha as scripture, because the 1611 King James, which they are King James onlyists, they adhere to that. But I had gotten to the point where we talked about Josephus, and of course, immediately as soon as I brought the name up, he was like, what was his nationality? And so I didn't necessarily find anything except that, possibly a connection to Judea with the father. And he was like, "Oh, okay." And so I then showed the quote, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and probably some of the audience, where it talks about the threefold division of the law and the prophets and the other writings, and he even explains which of these books are there. And he had no response to it at that point. I never got to see him again afterwards, but that really got him thinking, which makes me wonder and I wrote an article on this as well, and because it seems the only thing I hear is, well, the certain feast day is mentioned in the New Testament, and where do you get the feast day? From the book of Maccabees. Therefore, the rest of the 1611 Apocrypha is therefore God-inspired scripture. Is there any other logic that they're utilizing in that? And isn't that kind of ironic that they are like against saying, the Bible has removed these books because the Roman Catholic Church wanted to remove the history of Israel, but yet it was the Council of Trent that canonized the Apocrypha into their Bible in the first place?
Yeah, you can find their defenses of the Apocrypha, like they're not very robust defenses, for example. But here's one I'm pulling up: the Israelites, the Apocryphas in the Bible. It's only 8.5 minutes. This is by IUIC Tallahassee, and they give their reasons there. Generally speaking, they mention the festival that Jesus attended. They'll say that is only found in the Apocrypha. That is kind of their main go-to. And then a lot of it really has to do with conspiracy theories, where they essentially say, the white church took these out because these books are about our history and they don't want us to know. And then they'll read verses from the Apocrypha that say things like never trust your enemy, or they'll read certain verses because the Apocrypha, while it has some historical value and actually theological value, so we can understand what Jews at the time believed primarily during what's called Second Temple Judaism. The Apocrypha has elements of ethnocentrism that go beyond what the Old Testament, I think, would condone. And so it's useful for them to kind of say things, well, these other nations, they ain't nothing but spit, and stuff like that. And then when I bring up some of the problems with the Apocrypha, the responses, generally speaking, are pretty weak. And it's also difficult whenever I use the Apocrypha as a source, in the sense of saying, well, we can know some Jews believed in this about the bodily resurrection because we can even see here the Maccabees mentioning this. It's a defense to show certain things Jews believed about the resurrection at the time. It's not an endorsement of the Apocrypha, right. But they have difficulty separating that out. And so they'll say, Vocab doesn't believe in the Apocrypha, yet he's citing it. And of course, I have also brought out the hypocrisy of them saying, hey, Vocab, you and your guys are all Roman Catholic Christians. I'll say, hey, you're the one with the Apocrypha, not me. And the tough thing is, though, they generally don't actually really fully understand what I'm saying. I've said earlier, they're masters, a lot of them, of psychological warfare and reading people. They're not really adept at grasping irony, though. That's
whoa. Okay,
irony
would not necessarily go down that type of a crazy.
Hebrew Israelites in general are sort of. I describe most Hebrew Israelites. The religion makes you relatively humorless, and so you have a lot of Hebrew Israelites who are essentially humorless. And irony detection is one of their weak suits. And right. so you bring this out like, hey, you're accusing me of being Romanish, but you're the guy with the Apocrypha. And we look at reasons why we don't hold to the Apocrypha real quickly. 2 Maccabees 12:45-46. It advocates praying for the dead. But I think that passages like Luke 16:25 and Hebrews 9:27 would go against that. God assists Judith in a lie in Judith 9:10-13. Tobit was supposed to be alive when Jeroboam had his revolt there in 931. And so that's 931 BC, but Tobit then was said to be alive in the Apocrypha, also during the Assyrian captivity of 722.
And then there's the textual critical issues with it, because like you have, I forget which one it is, but like I think it's Second Esdras that is said to be, it claims to be written by the same author, Ezra, but is said to potentially only have existed within the first, second century, at least in the portions.
Issues with authorship, pseudepigrapha, where you have an author falsely attributed to the book. But back to that Tobit point, Tobit itself, the book says he only lived 158 years. That's Tobit chapter 1, 3-5, and 14:11. So you have these problems of contradictions and whatnot. And that's just, kind of the beginning of some of the issues. When you look, Jesus never endorses the Apocrypha as scripture. When he says it is written as God said, he never does that with the Apocrypha, even if he does allude to it. And I think that's a matter of discussion, a topic of debate. Jesus seems to decidedly leave out the Apocrypha when he talks about you guys have always been killing the prophets. And then he goes A to Z, the way it ends up in English, ironically enough. He goes A to Z, and that would exclude the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha itself doesn't claim to be divinely inspired and seems to indicate that the direct revelation from God had sort of ceased at that point, at that time. So there's massive issues there, but they like it because of certain things they believe it props up. And it's almost like a sort of another weapon in their arsenal against unsuspecting Protestants, I think, as well, because they'll quote something and you'll be like, what? Like, this is God's word. We don't care if you accept it or not,
And isn't like Ecclesiasticus itself, which is in the Apocrypha, give out that threefold division, the law, the prophets, and the other writings? Wouldn't that also kind of be a giveaway within the Apocrypha that says, it doesn't identify this part here as, divinely inspired. It says it's the law, the prophets, and then other writings.
I do not know the answer to that. I don't know if Ecclesiasticus does that. I don't know the answer to that question.
But there's several things, and I think this would be in the precept realm, using an internal critique and taking the logic of the text and trying to see, how can they square with some of these issues if they're claiming that it is God-inspired scripture. And to me, just as you mentioned, some of the defenses and everything, I think the claims that try to say that it's, because again, this is what I mostly just hear, that it's the feast days, therefore it's, because that at least only gets you Maccabees. I'm not so sure about the others, but then the other ones could be just that, well, it was in the 1611 authorized King James Bible, which was authorized by King James, who, by the way, was a black man, I commend the language that you utilized in refuting that notion in your book when they try to use that, especially when showing the scene in script form in the movie Barry, which is where the title of the book comes from, was for Barack Obama versus the Black Hebrew Israelites, because that phrase, and I want to give some money to the guy who made that phrase for the movies. He looked like Billy D. Williams, if you ask me. I'm like, I never thought about that before. So, but yeah, that seems to be the only arguments that they give, and I don't know about you. I don't find that convincing at all, and I'd be surprised how anybody finds those as convincing arguments to state that therefore this is somehow God inspired. Right.
Well, the interesting thing is, I'd have to see what the KJV says. I'd be interested to see what the KJV says here. Mm-hmm. But the place they go to, okay, I got it right now, is John 5:1. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. I believe that's the place that they go to. The thing is, though, even there, they're assuming that it's Purim. It seems like they're assuming that it's Purim there, which comes out, which the origin of that festival is discussed in the book of Esther. Esther 3:7, Esther 9:24, and there is reference made to Purim in the apocryphal literature, 2 Maccabees 15:36, and something in Josephus as well. But in the New Testament, there's not really any kind of reference given, and so there's no reason we should presuppose that Purim was a festal pilgrimage type situation, meaning was it one of the festivals where you had to go into Jerusalem for it? No indication that that's the case. Purim is certainly something that Second Temple Judaism celebrated, right? No doubt about that. Nothing wrong with that. That's actually, to me, that's an indication that sort of cultural, traditional things, as long as they don't violate word of God, actually can be sort of okay, for lack of a better word. But assuming if that's what we're going to do here, John 5:1 is referring to Purim, is a problem, because you'd have to show that Purim is one of the festal pilgrimage type situations where you go up to Jerusalem for the feast, because that's what Jesus is doing. So there's really no reason to think that is what it is. But that's my understanding is that's a main one that they use there. And so the reasons aren't good. Sometimes it will say, hey, well, it was in the KJV, why was it taken out of your Bibles? Yeah. And that in a similar kind of discussions you might have with what they say Roman Catholic apologists as well, the shape of the canon, as it were. But of course, the Hebrewites, they follow, ironically, there's different apocryphas. So the Ethiopian church has a different apocrypha than the Roman Catholic Church. That's the Western apocrypha. Their canons are not identical in regards to those middle books that they both include. And even Rome considers what they call deuterocanonical. So they even make a designation, a distinction, a denotation there. Mm-hmm. there's not a lot of subtlety with the Israelite version. They just bring it out with them, generally speaking, and they're going to read from it and they're going to utilize it. So I have some friends who do things like, okay, we'll take your presupposition, and they go through the Apocrypha and show how there's all kinds of stuff in the Apocrypha itself that goes against Hebrew Israelite doctrine. And so that's something you can do as well. Say, okay, if we're going to use the Apocrypha, check this out, and you show how there's places there that are problems for them. Right. Generally speaking, I make those criticisms, like I did a brief criticism of some reasons I reject the Apocrypha. Generally speaking, the Hebrew Israelite response I've seen is Vocab is showing he's just a scoffer. He doesn't really believe the word of God. That's generally the response I see out of them.
Which is ironic. Which is ironic because I've seen that mostly when they make a response, they just either depict you as the devil. In fact, that was actually what I'm trying to see who it was. Jonathan Soko in the chat tried to ask a funny question where he said, Vocab, how does it feel to be the devil that the Bible describes? And I guess that's an inside joke with y'all or something like that.
Well, Jonathan Soko is actually an ex-GOCC. That's a Hebrews Like Camp member himself, so he knows what's popping. And secondly, they're partially right. Let me explain why. A lot of people don't know this, but I had the unfortunate pleasure of graduating from a high school whose motto was the Red Devils. And so my yearbook, they name yearbooks. My yearbook is called the El Diablo. Right on the front cover, they got a red devil pitchfork and everything on the front cover of my high school yearbook. So there's a very real sense in which I'm a red devil.
There you go, from the high school that you graduated from.
Yes.
But this is where it's weird because I guarantee you that and this is what's also going to be interesting is I bet some money on it. Like there's going to be like some people that are from these camps that may for some reason pick up on this thing. Because we had one earlier that said, praise Yahawashai, which I know that's their Lashawan Kodash phrase for Jesus, and we'll get into that in a bit on what Lashawan Kodash is. But, they just either, mock and make you look like a devil. I was actually in one Discord chat that a Hebrew Israelite tried to start up, and he failed miserably because he would keep deleting any actual responses that refuted him, and we just spam with the same stuff over and over again until he couldn't take it, and he just ended his whole deal. But there was a time that he brought you up, and I don't know, he was making fun of how his whole thing was about Vocab's cheeks, referring to I guess the face cheeks are looking quite thin, man. He talks about a passage that says to cut a glutton or something like that, and it shows a picture of you with a razor slitted around your neck.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
I'm gonna see this. This is awesome. Can you send me? I want to see this.
I wish I could, but like I said, he deleted it.
Keep it. You're telling me there's an image of me with a razor and they're slashing my cheeks or throat or whatever, and you didn't save it?
He would, because that was the thing. He was so. I was having a hard time believing if this guy was serious or not, because sometimes he would delete this stuff, just like he deleted the server as a whole, because he realized he could not contain the echo chamber he was trying to create. He was dealing with a bunch of Christians that refuted him left and right. And I was going to actually save that, but he deleted the whole server before I could even get a chance to grab it. But it was just poor quality. You could tell he was trying to draw it from some kind of tablet with his finger or something like that.
I would love to see it. Yeah, stuff like that's pretty common. There's thousands of stuff like that.
Do they have any justification biblically for this stuff, or do they just go with this off their emotions?
Well, I mean, isn't God going to kill the wicked? Isn't that, didn't the prophets prophesy the destruction of wicked kingdoms? Yeah. If they think you're an Edomite, they'll go to Obadiah 1, which prophesies the destruction of the Edomite kingdom, for example. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, there's all kinds of places, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So, and that's another thing, too, because I noticed it's not all of them. And I don't know how they feel about it all the time, but I do notice, especially ISUPK and Zachary, these guys, they affirm the New Testament, right? These particular groups.
Yeah, although Zachary likes to play games with it, they go back and forth with dissing Paul and wanting to push him out of the canon. And they've got this new tactic. Zachary is the shiftiest camp, and I literally mean shiftiest in the sense that they're constantly shifting their positions on issues. And you never really know what they're gonna say about what they believe about any given topic, and depending on the audience and the day. They got this new one where they say, "Well, Matthew was an eyewitness and was written in Hebrew, so when we ever go to the Gospels, we need to take Matthew as priority over the other Gospels first." That's a new one I've been hearing. So they like to stratify the canon. But Zachary would say they would, in most contexts, say they essentially accept the New Testament. And with Christians who don't know, they'll use whatever they want from the New Testament. But they do play games with Paul, and they're taking cues, partially, it appears, from a so-called moderate guy named Ron Shields, who I, for the most part, personally like. I personally like Salazar Ben Loya as well, actually. And Officer Assad, I like all those guys on a personal level. But so it's difficult to say, do they believe in the New Testament in an unqualified way?
And so, so I guess then they would definitely not be going by with the argument I'm about to present is, but I think ISUPK, like, they cuss a lot. And then there's the passages within Colossians. And I actually did a video covering the issue about Christians and the topic of cussing based off the passages in the Greek and everything. Do they not? How do they understand those passages where it's talk about not using corrupt communication or foul language?
2 Corinthians 11:6 says, "But though I be rude in speech, yet not in knowledge, but we have been thoroughly made manifest among you in all things." So right there, Paul said he was rude in speech.
So that's where they would go to for that particular deal.
Didn't Paul say, if anyone doesn't believe the gospel, let him be accursed? Paul was cursing people out.
Right. Okay. There you go.
So those are some of the places they would go to: Galatians and then 2 Corinthians 11. So they don't always like Paul, but when they want to have justification for cursing you out, then they go to Paul.
It's like pick and choose. It's like a buffet. Don't eat the whole thing. Just have whatever portions you want. Leave the rest out of the table. So
Hebrew hopscotch. It's Hebrew hopscotch.
Hebrew hopscotch. It's precept upon precept, man. Let's go over you mentioned Ron Shields, Ron Divine Prospect Shields from Atlanta, Georgia, with the Kingdom Harbinger Ministry. So these guys, you say that you've had respectful communications with them. Are they like the other different camps, or are they kind of a down to earth kind of guys?
Well, I don't really know a lot of people directly from Kingdom Harbinger except for Ron Shields himself.
Right.
And Ron Shields himself, he has his days like anybody else, but I've met up with him a few times, and it's been cool. I kind of like him better live and in person than I maybe do sometimes online, but I get that comes with the territory to a certain extent. And so dealing with him is not like dealing with the other camps in a lot of ways, because he is much more familiar with some of the terms that you might use in a theological setting. So he has a better grasp on the vocabulary of theology, and that can be helpful sometimes in the conversation because there's less explaining and whatnot. And he has the ability to ask actually more interesting questions because of some of the background reading he does. So you can actually have some pretty interesting conversations with him because of that. And so it's different, but he does run cover for some of the camps. Specifically, Zachary likes to take what he does and apply it in their street settings with kind of their own twist on it. This is the trend I see them do, and I don't know if I see them really giving Ron credit, but this is my perception. And my man G-Con kind of first pointed this out, and I kind of agreed with his take on it. So that's kind of what's up with him. The quick version of that.
Right. So let's go over, because I remember you make a distinction in your book between, the One West camp, and then you have Chicago. You make a distinction even to the point that even though there's only like about two of them in your chart in your book, you have Israel of God and then another group, and you make a mention that you have a better experience with the people from the Chicago based camps, because like you mentioned, you had a debate with one of them from Israel of God. They even bought you lunch, as you described in your book, as y'all had to sit down and talk, and they even have a video of that discussion and dialogue on their channel.
Well, Israel of God, cool people, and yeah, they're out of Chicago. They're really big. They got a 6,000 seat church there in Riverdale, Illinois. It's a suburb in southern outside of South Chicago, and yeah, there's groups like them as well. They'll say things like, "Hey, you Gentiles can be grafted in and be our brother. We don't preach the hate doctrines. We respect our women and things like that." And if all Hebrew Israelites were like Israel of God, there still would be some problems we would really need to discuss, but it would be a much different world, a much different setting, a much different situation. But the fact is, they're not. And no one really knows the future. If the moderates are going to outpace the militants or vice versa, or what the split's going to be like, no one really knows. But we got to deal with what we got to deal with. And at the end of the day, Hebrew Israelism's growing, and guys go out on the street. So Israel of God may be bigger, but a lot of times they end up being less visible and have a smaller voice, disproportionate to actually their larger size. So you have very interesting dynamic factors happening there. But on a personal level, I've had almost 100% across the board, for the most part, positive experiences with Israel God. And again, I don't really take, for the most part, these kind of things personal, And right. So what I mean is, like, it's not like some kind of thing like, well, therefore their doctrines, I can't criticize their doctrine because they're so nice. No, I mean, Mormons are really nice, and we got to criticize their doctrine of becoming gods and multiple marriages and everything else. Well, similar with Israel of God, right? We still got to talk about things because they matter. They're issues of life and death and salvation and sanctification, and they have ecclesiastical implications. These things matter as well. And honestly, even though GMS can kind of while out, not all, but a lot of GMS camps actually end up being my favorite camps because, generally speaking, they're a lot more willing to say what they believe, and I don't mind them being kind of rough and tumble. And GMS sometimes is the like sort of the most fun. They're willing to kind of like make some jokes, have some fun, even though, yeah, they can get, however, there's exceptions like GMS Chicago. By and large, I do not have a positive impression of GMS Chicago. I don't have a positive impression of GMS, the Bay Area camps. But a lot of these guys, when I meet them face to face, my heart goes out to them. Even though I'm going to step to them about their doctrine, they don't understand that I'm sitting there like, dear Lord, bring these guys out. And so on a personal level, I like some of the interactions with GMS. IUIC, I respect them to a large degree. I think they do some positive things. Now, so does the Nation of Islam, right? That doesn't mean they're doctrine. But as far as how they interact with me, I don't like the way IUIC is because I find it cowardly. I get what they're trying to do. I get their rationale. I could play their role, but I find it cowardly where they'll go after Christians and they title these videos all these kind of very sensationalistic ways, but they have this official policy of ignoring me. And the second I show up, this happens every time with IUIC. One guy gets on the phone to his superior officer, and the other guy starts recording me specifically with a cell phone. This is their protocol because I've noticed it numerous times. You notice patterns emerge. The other thing is they turn up the sound and they have a guy behind the speaker who actually puts the speaker on me wherever I walk. They do things like that. So I do not like that. And IUIC says they're all professional and nonviolent. I have had IUIC and I get it. So the superior guy told him, hey, don't do that. I have had some of them try to kind of get rough. And to be honest, Zachary, even though I've seen them be rough with other people, they've never done that in person. Maybe one day they'll change their mind, but so far it hasn't. Whereas IUIC actually has, and they're the ones with kind of the better reputation. Mm-hmm. So, you have these personal experiences of what it's really like out the street when you bring opposition to their doctrine. You know what I mean? And so it's very, very interesting. And I'm willing to change my mind about any of these guys or any of these groups at any time because everything's in motion, and I understand that.
I agree, because I do remember that they did put out a ban on talking to you and then other people that are affiliated with you, like in terms of like the Shield Squad and I think Soldiers of God.
That was different. That was this gal named Sheikah Tiba who made a moratorium or whatever, not allowed. It was like a boycott against me and the folks I roll with. IUIC has done the same thing as far as out on the street, but that was an online group of Hebrew Israelites led by Sheikah Tiba and some
just
of her
that name there, Sheikah Tiba.
Well, I mean. I mean, Cornelius Van Til's kind of a weird name, right?
Well, to be fair, true. It's certainly an interesting name. Why I've been loving and enjoying to study him. I can't wait till the Christian Apologetics book I ordered gets in, by the way, for that. Thanks for reminding me of that.
No.
Which, let's go into that. First of all, Shikatiba, is that a name? Because I did mention this earlier. Is that a name that's based on trying to utilize a part of the Lashawan Kodesh?
No, that's not Lashawan Kodash. No.
Okay, because
She's got E's in there. She's got E's in there. That's no, you can't have no Lashawan Kodash, no E sound. That's why they don't like Yahweh. When I say E, I don't literally mean. I'm just saying the E sound. You know what I'm saying? They don't like that. They don't think that's represented in Hebrew.
Gotcha. So we got about 10 minutes left. So let me just try to make this the last one we get. Lashawan Kodash. What is it? How do they come to this conclusion? And what is the best way to refute this language of theirs that they've come up with? Or what did they come up with it? Did they borrow this notion from somebody else?
Well, that is still being researched because the actual phrase, I'm going to look it up real quick here. The actual phrase actually, now not actually Lashawan Kodash, because Lashawan Kodash is sort of said and it's sort of said in a Lashawan Kodash way, but the idea of a pure tongue or a holy tongue comes out of Zephaniah 3:9, which says this in the KJV: "For then I will restore to the peoples a pure language, that they all may call on the name of the Lord to serve him with one accord." And so the concept is there. They think it's a restoration of the real Hebrew there, and actually is bandied about, this idea of holy tongue or pure tongue, bandied about in some of the rabbinical literature. And so the reason why I say is the actual phraseology appears, and my man Abu is doing good work on this. It seems heavily evidenced that the phrase itself actually comes out of rabbinic Judaism, which makes sense because the origin of One West is prior to them found the commandment keepers, who are clearly influenced by rabbinic Judaism in a multiplicity of ways. And so it appears that that's where the phrase comes from. Now, the idea of actually the particular ways that they have the Hebrew sound seem peculiar to them. And so basically, they don't believe that the vowels, they don't believe essentially that they can make more than one sound. And the only sound they have, all their vowels make, with a few exceptions, is the ah sound. And so that's why their names are like, Alazar ben Loya, and, names like Hakah and Hassad, and Ariam Lab and Gabar, Tahar. You hear all those A's are all up in there, right? The A sound. And
yeah, of course.
The other exception is that I, and the example of that is Jesus' name, that they would say Yahweh Shai. The name of God proper is Yahweh. And so you have that popping up. Now, where did it come from? The actual way they do it. They don't recognize us a lot of times, but there's different accounts that are bandied about of some kind of visionary experience. Originally, it was said to be done by Ariyah, but it appears there may have been a precedent prior to Ariyah, who's still alive. He's an older man. He's towards the end of his life. He's actually still active in the way he can be, being old, with the ICGJC, who currently just lost their leader, Tazadakia, due to COVID-19. Now, it appears from elders, these are elderly men, and they're also elders in Israel considered, who knew Abba Bivens, who that's the name he's properly called. That's actually not his real name. We've done shows on that. But the man that they call Abba Bivens, his contemporaries say he was studying Hebrew in the kitchen, and a man in the gray suit, whom they understood to be an angel, revealed to him the proper way to pronounce the Hebrew. And that version is somewhat different than the version you hear bandied about. And the problem is you hear different versions of this vision. And I feel like we need to get sort of some of this recorded, because a lot of it is oral history that they don't like to say to outsiders. Some of the other versions you've heard in relation to Ariyah are he had a dream of an angel who spoke in some kind of tongue he didn't understand. And Arya said, "What is that?" And he says, "That's the language of your forefathers, of your fathers who came before you. You only have forgotten it." And that's interesting because the original name for Lashon Kodash by Abba Bivens, according to his contemporaries who are still alive and have done interviews on the subject, was, I believe, Derek Abot, which means like I think the language of the father or something like that, language of the fathers. I might be getting some of that wrong. But that's basically right. I do know that because I've done a lot on this. So the point by saying that is that even Aria's reported vision to his students appears to be borrowing from Abba Bivens prior to him, but he had somewhat, it appears, a different vision. And so most one Westerners will credit Aria, but they'll just say that this is the way the Paleo Hebrew should be properly sounded out, or the ancient Hebrew. Now, Paleo Hebrew is simply a script. It can be made to do anything as long as you understand the way the characters operate. It literally has nothing to do with the way the words sound. It's just a script to convey sounds. But one Westerners ask if in essence Paleo Hebrew script is in essence synonymous with Lashon Kodash soundings. But Lashon Kodash is simply vocative speculations based upon really guesswork of the vocalizations of what they would say would have been proper before you have the vowel pointers introduced in the Hebrew script, and that's where they always put it on. They always put it on the Masoretes. They say prior to this, you have the case where this is the way it would have sounded. Now that seems in a way unprovable. Like, how would you really know? Because it's not like you have a recording, right? So exactly how would you know that that's the case? Well, they had a divine revelation. Now they say it matches up with what they had been studying, but. And I know that's a lot to take in, guys, but here's the thing. Mm-hmm. The Bible shows us differently. And this is where I'll end. What this does is this proves, and I have a video coming out, I believe, next Friday. Maybe it's Saturday, I forget.
Stay
but
tuned
next
for
week,
that, folks.
On this in depth, but I'm going to give you the quick version because you kind of got to hear these things a number of times to kind of get them. If you go to Matthew chapter 27, Matthew chapter 27.
Let me make sure to pull that
up. What we have there is Jesus speaking in verse 46. Now, Matthew here in Greek, and the original manuscripts that we have, it's in Greek. But what happens is you have a transliteration. A translation conveys meaning. A transliteration conveys sound. The transliteration of what Jesus was saying, which was either Aramaic or Hebrew. There seems to be a mixture, so it may have been Aramaic influenced Hebrew or vice versa. But listen to this. And about the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, and so this shows Matthew understood what Jesus was actually saying, first of all, because he's translating the transliteration. But Matthew, for the sake of people understanding the very next verse, which is verse 47, he transliterates, my God, why hast thou forsaken me, which is from Psalm 22. So people understand when they read verse 47, some of them that stood there, when they heard that, said, this man called for Elias. If he didn't translate or alliterate it, you wouldn't understand that the way Jesus spoke when he said this from the cross, you wouldn't have understood that it sounded like, sort of had to sound like with Elijah or Eli. You wouldn't have really understood that. And so Matthew does that for the sake of the listener, the transliteration. But Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani is not Lashon Kodash. And so it doesn't matter what the script is or what the language is. What it shows you is the way the words Jesus said sounded. Do you guys see with that? Yeah. You guys see what I'm saying there? And so let me show you exactly what I mean. Give me a second here, and I'm going to show you the way it would have sounded because I've actually got it here. But before I do that, because I'm going to show you the one West Lashon Kodash, if Jesus spoke their language, I'm going to show you what he would have had to have said. Okay, so I'm going to show you there in a second. But does that make sense what I'm saying so far?
Yeah, it does. It does, yeah.
Good.
I had a question I wanted to ask you.
All right, so here's the last thing. If he was speaking Lashon Kodash, he would have said, Aliyah, Aliyah, lama shabachwanathana. Now, I don't know if I said that last part right. It's a little difficult to say. But okay. Aliyah, Aliyah, my God, in Lashon Kodash, lama shabachwathana. Kwarthanaya. That's what he would have said, but he didn't say that. You see what I'm saying? That's not what he said.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
So
it proves Jesus did not speak in Lashawan Kodash, because Matthew records the sounds of Jesus' words, and they're not Lashawan Kodash. It's right there in the text.
But Vocab, don't you know, this is another attempt by the Roman Catholics to corrupt the scriptures to remove what was originally there.
That's usually not what I hear them say, and you'll see this in this video. You'll see this in this video coming out, and the premiere broadcast page is already out. So what I'll do is I'll drop the link for this coming up. But we've made a quite offensive, but also hilarious. So I think a lot of humor sometimes is offensive. A cover image here that's got the One West version of Jesus on the cross, and he's like pinned to Jim Caviezel's body, and then he's saying the first phrase of Lashawan Kodash from the cross, and then we got a GMS Dallas member on the bottom saying sounds legit, and so that's going to be a 22-minute video where we're going to break down this in further detail by my man Abu, and I just dropped that link in the live chat there.
All right, good thinking there. Now let me ask, do they just try to, whenever someone joins the group, do they just try to come up with their own name or they take their real name and just add the whole Lashawan Kodash thing?
Usually an older member in the camp will base it upon the perceived characteristics of the neophyte and give him a Lashawan Kodash version, usually by pulling out Strong's and Lashawan Kodashing whatever word they find there, his name that would be in Hebrew, and putting that upon him. So this brother has a quiet spirit. So they'll look up quiet spirit, and the guy's name will be Quiet Spirit in Lashawan Kodash.
Interesting.
So, because that's what I was going to try to...
They take their real name. So a perfect example of Nathaniel is not Nathaniel or whatever of IUIC. But it's ironic because IUIC has since moved away from Lashawan Kodash. But go ahead.
Really?
Yeah, they use disparaging terms to describe it and generally do not view it as valid anymore.
Well, I'll give him props on that at least. So that's good. So the reason why I'm asking about this, because this I want to be like the last note we try. Is there a potential way that utilizing Aeve's name here, that we could come up with a Lashawan Kodash name for Aeve? Because I have a feeling that could be pretty hilarious utilizing the way it is already.
But I have to get back to you because I am not the expert like my man Abu is. I would have to run it by Abu's like my Lashawan Kodash translator. Whenever I'm unsure about one of these kinds of questions, I asked him because he's a linguist familiar with a multiple field of Semitic languages and has been studying Lashawan Kodash for years. And so I never do it without him. So I have to get back to you on that. Because
that would be the thing. Next time we come up, next Thursday, Aeve, whenever we're on the show, we should like have a meme ready. Like you're dressed up in like some ISUPK or IUIC attire, and then it's like we have your Hebrew Israelite name at that point. That'd be pretty hilarious to see right there. Course. Especially if you got like the purple robes on and everything.
Well, when it comes to like, different languages and especially the Hebrew Israelites, I was wondering, Vocab, how do you feel about like using the Y word to just describe God, like his true name? Because I know that in like Judaism, it's not like you're not really supposed to say it out loud.
Yeah, Judaism, they're worried about violating. Thou shalt not take the Lord thy God's name in vain. So
right, but like when they read the Torah, they always don't actually they just read it like in their minds. They don't actually say.
Yeah, because they're worried about violating that. I think there's some interesting issues to explore there because on one hand, you find it in the Hebrew text, but on the other hand, you don't see Yahweh or Yahweh or anything like that appear in the Greek text. Whenever the Greek writers do it, and see, it gets a little confusing there because they are generally speaking quoting the Septuagint, and then they're writing in Greek. They generally go with Lord. they generally go with kurios to say Lord or Lord, or then the generic Greek word theos. So like Lord, God, kurios, theos. You have those kinds of things popping off in the Greek. So it's interesting that that doesn't carry over into the Greek, sort of the divinely revealed sacred name of Exodus 3 and whatnot. But at the same time, it's I think we could say that it's possible that maybe in Judaism's traditions they may have went overboard and not ever saying it, and so you actually have Yahweh being replaced by Adonai, and I don't know about that either. Where simply or in some streams you just simply say, they'll say Hashem, the name, and I don't know if there's a strong biblical precedent for that. So I kind of have mixed views on some about what I don't really have a thing where, if you don't say the right thing or the right way. I think generally scholastically it can be understood that I think Yahweh is the closest approximation to what the Tetragrammaton would have been, but I don't really get deep into those debates. And the Hebrew Israelites calling God Yahweh and Jesus Yahushai is really kind of on the bottom of their list of their egregious offenses. It's really not the big deal. However, when they couple that with Acts 4:12 and say, well, there's only one name given under heaven when you be saved, so if you don't do it, you can't be saved. I've seen some of them do that. I don't like that, because then they turn the sacred name thing into a something they're wrong on, ironically, into a salvation type issue. That's a problem. But
right? Yeah, of course.
That I don't really.
I always considered it like a respect type of thing. Like, you don't.
Yeah, but did God tell us to do that? You see what I'm saying?
That's
I get
question.
that.
Mm-hmm.
But if God, if that's not an instruction by God to never utter his name, then it's like almost like I feel like we might be in danger of being more holy than God on that point. And I say that with tongue in cheek. You know what I'm saying?
I mean,
so
I would say that I would say that God is more holiest than us, and that we're not really worthy of actually saying his name.
Where does he say that, though? I understand you feel that way. Where does God say what you just said, though? You're not worthy of uttering my name.
That's a very good question.
See,
I'm not sure,
if you can take his name in vain,
Judaism, though.
Yeah, but we don't follow after Judaism. We follow after Old Testament as filtered through the understanding of Jesus Christ. Check this out. If you can take his name in vain, that means you're allowed to say it. Because how can you take his name in vain if you're not uttering his name? How can you take it in vain? How can you use his name improperly or irresponsibly if you can't say his name?
So essentially, if someone says
that's a very good point.
So and that's not necessarily permissive of saying, like GD or anything like that, but it's like if the name has been said.
I do think that applies to GD. Hebrew Israelites love One Westerners do say GD, and they'll say, well, that's not his name anyway. But the Greek, now we're speaking in English, and so GD I do think is taking, so is when people say JC and all the variations of saying, Jesus Christ that they use as a curse word. I do think that applies. But I think there's other things that also applied, like when you're lying, especially if you're telling the truth, I think you can kind of be like, well, let's have a discussion about this. But if you're lying and you say God is my witness or Lord knows or something, but you're actually lying, you are clearly taking God's name in vain to use kind of like the divine name to prop up a lie. You know what I'm saying? There's some issues.
Totally.
All right, so I understand now there.
I think everyone is taking God's name in vain. Every single person on the planet, I think, is taking God's name in vain. You see what I'm saying?
I would just say
it moves beyond the simplistic.
Out the word.
Yeah.
Yes, that's part of the problem, but I think it goes deeper. All the Ten Commandments are deeper than at first glance, and so I think the Pharisees a lot of times actually took God's name in vain when they say, "Well, God wants us to do this," and it's actually they're not representing what God wants to do. They're representing what they want to do when they're acting as if God is co-signing it, such as the situation that Jesus brought up with the situation of what was it called? Quran with the Quran, where you can not give your parents money and you save for the temple. I think that's actually using God's name in vain in essence. God would want me to do this, save it for the temple, so I can't help you out, parents. I forget what the term was, a theological term that Jesus used, but he says you make void God's law, the traditions of men. I think that's actually an example. I think it's more expansive than just saying OMG. I think you could count that perhaps, but I think it goes further than that.
I've just learned something new at this point, so thank you for that. It's like, there's the saying, if you want seminary education for free, pick a fight with the Calvinists. We didn't have to pick a fight. We just brought a guy on that knew his stuff, and I learned something interesting. So thanks for that. And in general, thank you for coming on and discussing these issues. We're sorry we didn't get too many audience questions. to go over this. I was actually surprised that we didn't have like some Hebrew Israelites come into the chat, because I used to know that if you would have put Hebrew Israelites or anything like that in like your title, they would like try to find these chats. But I guess that kind of has died down since the book has come out and more content.
No. Just go on YouTube right now and change your parameters. Put Vocab Malone in the search bar, and then change your parameters to only entries in the past week. Ooh. And watch all the stuff that pops up. It has not died down at all. Okay. I guarantee you.
I spoke too soon.
I guarantee you there's some lurkers here. And there'll be some folks afterwards who comb through this and do what they do. But you never know what's going to have them, respond or not at the same time. But
yeah, I can imagine like the live chat in that one, or just when they make the videos like, oh, you got Vocab here wearing his stupid hat. And then he's gonna comment on me, and he's like, we got ourselves this non-kosher dog-looking thing on here, and then we got a little effeminate-looking dude on here. Like, the worst I've had about my profile picture being described is I look like a, quote, and I'm not making this up, by the way, quote, lesbian biker chick is what I've had my profile picture being described.
I could see that. Yeah, that's a good one. And of course, a fox is a dog, which is an unclean animal, and Jesus describes hares that way. So you got one guy basically on here, he's saying, "Hey, basically, I'm over here."
Are humans' best friends? All right.
Well, Jesus said, "You go tell that fox," and he didn't mean it in a compliment.
Ouch.
I can, that's exactly how I imagine. Imagine if we do get a video, and those are the words: "Ring, ring, pick up the phone because we called it." So. Just saying, but hey, again, thanks for coming on here, man. And just so for the audience that is tuning in either right now or when the stream is over, what is the best way that they can continue to follow you? And what are some upcoming projects that you are comfortable with sharing for some people to, be prepared for from Vocab?
Well, we're in the middle of dropping Islamicize Me. Redropping a special edition, so it's on my channel right now, and so you definitely want to check those out. They drop every Tuesday and Thursday. That'll be happening probably all the way until July. You definitely want to see what we put up a week ago. We got a new channel trailer called We're Just Getting Started. It's 3 minutes of epic awesomeness. And then you definitely also want to check out some of the other stuff that's popping up, which I got one coming up the first time I met the GMS Dallas camp. I got a video coming up about how 5 jihadi terrorists came out of one mosque, so that's going to be helpful. This Saturday, I've got the reincarnation debate with a Hebrew Israelite who's a smart guy and a nice guy. Tomorrow, is the Feast of Pentecost, and so I'm going to have a Jewish Christian on and talk about Jewish Christians. He's going to talk about how Jesus is in that Hebrew festival there for Pentecost. And then later on, I have that video on Lashawan Kodash. That's June 5th premiering. And then all that's popping up. And so you just want to check all those and whatever else pops up on the channel, and just pray for one day this book to come out.
All right, I'll certainly be praying for that. And as soon as are you going to go through I think it's called Book Patch? Are you going to go distribute it through there again, or different?
Well, I got it on Amazon and Book Patch. I don't know. We'll find out what happens. I don't know the answer to that right now.
Because I do like getting books nowadays in the PDF, so that way that as I'm reading it, I have this little read aloud thing going with it, and that's just for some reason helps me focus. I play that along with some lo-fi hip-hop music on a little minimized sound thing. It just helps me relax and absorb that information. That's how within before the interview, starting on Monday, I was able to read at least 4 complete chapters of your book before the whole thing happened here. So can't wait either way, because if it's on Amazon, I will still try to plan on buying it on a paperback or hardcover, whichever format you decide to go with the book. But if it's on PDF, I'll also get that too. So, yes. Any last words that you would like to say for the audience for encouragement in dealing with this issue? And if they are watching, do you have any words for the Hebrew Israelites who may be lurking?
Well, yes.
Well, no. Say, hold up. Hold up.
I thought he was talking to you. I mean me.
Boy. For Vocab, yeah.
Well, I mean, the Hebrew Israelites, I love them, and I'd like to meet them, and I'd like to take them out and to a nice Italian dinner, and then only buy stuff that would be kosher, and talk over these issues, chilling. I'd like to do that sometime because a lot of them have not taken me up on that offer so far. They're only one guy off the top of my head, and so maybe one day we can have some more friendly conversations like that where we chill and break bread.
Mm-hmm. And for the Christians out there that may encounter these people, or if they do ever encounter them, what would your advice be for these final words?
Focus on the gospel. Focus on who God is, and try not to deviate off those two things. Who is God? What is the gospel?
Amen. Aeve, do you have any final words for the audience before we close out for the night?
Yeah, I do. Sorry about that before. I thought you were talking to me.
Understand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say some final words to Vocab. Thank you so much for coming on. I really learned a lot, honestly, tonight. It was really cool. Really amazing conversation. And, I don't know. I hope I can talk to you again in the future.
Well, heck yeah. Praise God, man. I'm glad for that.
Amen. All right,
Well,
so
all right.
folks, thank you for tuning in. We're not going to do the outro music like we usually do. And I actually figured out the whole thing with the live chat. Apparently, it's just, or not the live chat, the time on there. It's just that whenever you look at it, it says the limit, but by the time you get near it, then it expands it. I guess trying to guess where you might end at or something. I don't know. It's a new thing from YouTube that I'm just going to have to get used to. But folks, thank y'all for tuning in. If y'all haven't hit the like button, feel free to do so. If you haven't subscribed, what are you doing with your lives? We may have Vocab on in the future. And how will you know besides him just sharing on his page? You might be just a complete stranger just out of nowhere, and you won't even know unless you hit that subscribe button. And if you haven't subscribed to Vocab yet, the heck are you doing with your lives? Also subscribe to him. Make sure to send him some love as well. So until then, we'll see you next Thursday for Theological Discussion. This has been RC Apologist. Y'all take care.